George of the Tin Men, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I came across a post earlier today and I thought I'd read it out. It seems very topical and related to this podcast. It's from the College Historical Society of Dublin.
Oh, I've already shared this.
This house believes masculinity is inherently toxic. Toxic masculinity, we've all heard of it. From Andrew Tate to Henry VIII and Patrick Bateman to online incels, the epidemic of men just being the worst has haunted society for as long as anyone can remember. But where did this come from? Can men move beyond patriarchy? And is masculinity really about men? Come along to find out if masculinity is fixable or if we'll all have to keep listening to the worst guy you know pitching his podcast until the end of time. Are you going to be attending?
Well, I'm happy to say the comments on that post are now disabled as a result of my following just asking him a lot of difficult questions. And I find it ironic that a debate society would disable the comments. I'm like, what sort of debate is that?
I mean, that's a brilliant debate. It's a very typical debate of 2024.
I am like the master of all horrible things said about men and to men. So I've already been sent that and I've already shared it and I've already rattled that birdcage. But absolutely outrageous debate. It was something like, the thing that annoyed me most about it was their assertion that it is toxic. Not is it toxic? It is toxic. Secondly, inherently toxic. So like not even just it can be, it is inherently toxic to be masculine. And I have filed a complaint under hate speech. Hate speech is defined as prejudice or bias against someone for immutable characteristics. So I'm like, how outrageous would it be to have a debate saying, is being homosexual inherently toxic? Or is being black inherently toxic? Absolutely outrageous. And it's not, that happens all the time. That's not unique, unfortunately, but it was an exciting comment section until they disabled the comments. And,
do you think they'd host a debate pitching the same thing but for femininity?
Someone asked that, and no, because I don't think no one is inherently toxic. And if you are toxic, it's not because of your masculinity or femininity. I think someone did say in the comments, like, it was on the release of Mean Girls that we last talked about toxic femininity. And I was like, I don't support the concept of toxic femininity for the same reason as toxic masculinity. But if we were to talk about toxic femininity, I'll be like, yeah, let's look at gossip culture. Let's talk at like whispering groups, cancel culture. I'm amazed that cancel culture has not been gendered towards women. Like if you think about someone cancelling someone else, I guess Karens are sort of gendered, but I would say cancel culture, gossiping, like anything to do with the fashion industry. Like I lecture a lot of fashion students, so toxic, the fashion industry. And like things like climate change is somehow toxic masculinity. Like not recycling is toxic masculinity. Men eating meat is toxic masculinity. Driving big cars is toxic masculinity. All these things that are harming the environment, including the climate crisis itself, is toxic masculinity. And yet, I think in that view, we could look at ways in which women harm the environment. Like, for example, the amount of waste a lot of women create in fashion. A lot of microplastics, a lot of beauty products. Like the amount of crap in my flat for my girlfriend, who I love, is outrageous. And like men, I feel like are role models for like reusing clothing, for example. Like, I wear clothes day in, day out until that they're falling apart, and then I'll begrudgingly throw them away. And like, in that view, I think men are role models for re-wearing and like sustainable clothing.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't washed my boxes in the last 2 months, probably.
Honestly, so. the amount of holes in my clothing, like literally every single piece of clothing I have has a hole in it, if you're close enough. And I feel like we should do more of that. And men should be seen as amazing. They don't like, in terms of fast fashion, we can move that into toxic femininity too. And I don't want to do that. I'm joking. But this is the sort of worldview that we will inevitably go down if we're going to gender every single thing. And I don't appreciate those debates. I don't appreciate those worldviews. I think women and men, the vast majority of both groups, are wonderful people and not toxic, and certainly not inherently toxic.
Well, to delve into what you've said, why is it that a polarizing figure that's risen in the last years, someone like Andrew Tate or all these other streamers that we see that have risen, especially since lockdown, I find, why wouldn't you want to call them toxically masculine? Because
toxic masculinity places the blame in the wrong place. It doesn't address the environment that shaped that person or their experiences. Like I said, no one is born bad. No one is born bad, but we become bad through our experiences, our environment, what we go through. I'm sure like people like Andrew Tate, who are just almost irredeemable, like he must have gone through something to become this much of an asshole. So to call him toxic rather than the experiences he's gone through, I think you're misleading people. And that's why I like to look at toxic attitudes towards masculinity, which we all have and we all perpetuate, and how that can shape some men like Andrew Tate to sort of internalize that toxicity and become so-called toxically masculine himself. But it doesn't identify the causes of said toxicity, doesn't look at what that man has been through to shape his behavior. Because oftentimes, if you look at what that man's been through, it's often makes him a victim in his own right. Like, who knows what he's experienced. There's a great saying I heard from a friend of mine, and she said, there are no abnormal behaviors, only a normal response to an abnormal set of experiences. And that doesn't quite fit into a hashtag like toxic masculinity, but it's so much more useful. And that is that no behavior, no matter how abhorrent, is abnormal if you can see that within the context of that person's lived experiences. And it's very difficult to do that because some people think you're justifying toxic masculinity, but I'm not. I'm just trying to understand what makes people this way. So yeah, no, I'm not a big fan, and there's loads of reasons I don't like it. Just putting those two words together is harmful in my view, and we just would not do that to any other group, and we should not do it to any other group, and we shouldn't do it to men.
You pick up on the difficulty in not having a nuanced, streamlined hashtag. I mean, yeah. I've thought many times about the type of hashtags I could create that would absolutely dominate the internet in 2024. You know, don't hurt anyone, something like that. It's always along those lines of obvious stuff. And it also pisses me off when you see someone and their Instagram bio says, I'm anti-fascist, anti-hate. It's like, aren't we all? Yeah. Why do you have to put that in your bio? Are you trying to hide maybe something?
Yeah, it's a bit like when you go to McDonald's and it's like 100% beef. And it's like, well, I was expecting that. Like, that says a lot about your restaurant if you have to tell me that. That's what I expect. That's quite literally the bare minimum. Everyone should be like that. That's not a selling point, and it sort of reflects badly on you. Yeah, there's been loads of hashtags that I really wanted to put together. There's loads of content I wanted to put together that was actually too spicy even for me. I remember like the whole kill all men thing. I really wanted to take that and just put it next to a photo of George Floyd, because I feel like that would make the point so well. That would make the point so well, but too much. And then whenever people say, yeah, kill all men, I'm like, yeah. What about black men though? And they're like, no, not them. I'm like, what about trans men? Not those trans men. Gay men? They're not gay men. And I'm like, well, you said men. Are trans men not men? Are black men not like, you said men, like kill all men. So yeah, putting the hashtag kill all men next to George Floyd would be an absolute bombshell on Twitter, but too spicy, I think.
Yeah, it feels like we're living in a post-nuance era.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at this debating society, do you think that they've actually reasoned themselves into this position, or do you think it's just a virtue signal? There's that famous phrase that you can't reason someone out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into. So how do we go about changing this attitude? And do you think that it's logical and you can reason them out of it, or is it?
Even if you could, I'd say it's a waste of your time. Like, there are people that are willing to listen. Like, people will listen to this podcast right now who are not like that. Like I said, the vast majority of women and men are not like that. They are quietly listening and probably appalled at reading those things. And they can have their minds changed so much more easily than the people doing that debate. So I would not waste any more time than I needed to talking to those people. And I would spend it talking to people a lot more reasonable, listening quietly. Because I find that the people are sat around the table when that moron is shouting this anti-male bigotry. The people listening, they disagree, but they're too scared to say anything. So I would be like, this person is a lost cause. But this person, these people around me, I can present myself as a better example of inclusivity and sophistication. So I'll talk to them and I'll use this bigot as a vessel through which to get to them.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, I don't know if people are too scared. I'm sure that happens a lot of the time, but also it's this sort of Abilene paradox thing of thinking that everyone else believes that all men are toxic. So then you think it, and you all holding this belief to please others that don't even hold the belief. So it does just take that one brave person like you to create an Instagram account and dispel these myths. And before you know it, you see these thousands of comments piling up and you realize, oh, actually, this isn't what most people think.
No, well, like I said, I mean, people always think I get a huge amount of hate. And like, as tempting as it is to jump into that sense of victimhood and be like, oh, woe is me. I don't. I really, really don't. Like, every now and again, maybe. But the messages I get, and I'm happy to give you my phone, you can have a look for yourself, but there's overwhelming support from women and men. And it's amazing and it's quite surprising how little, once you actually step in, lift your head above the parapet, there isn't really that much coming at you. Like, people are way more reasonable. And the fear people have, I find, is unfounded in my experience. Like, there is no angry mob that's going to start burning your house down or throwing a brick through your window or, shitting on your doorstep. I'm sure people want to do that, but I've not met them yet. And the vast majority of people support what I do. But there are people that are scared. Like, I polled my following, and 80% said they've seen posts that they like and wanted to share, but didn't share it because they were scared. So it's like, straight away, I'm losing 80% of my reach just through fear. And it's not just me, obviously. I think a lot of people feel a certain way, but are just too afraid to say it. And not only does that rob those people of their voice, but it also emboldens the people that are yelling. And they think that they represent the majority. And it's like, no, just because you're the loudest doesn't mean you're the biggest. You're just disproportionately loud and annoying. And most people are just rolling their eyes and waiting for you to stop talking. Because so many people are afraid to like dip their toes into space. And I understand why, but having done more than just dip my toes in, I've been swimming around for quite a while, and like I've had overwhelming support, like enough support to be motivating in its own right. Like, there was no money here, no brand deals, no sponsorship. So it has to be personally rewarding. And the DMs I get every day of support do that times 10 for me. So thankfully, the hatred people are afraid of doesn't exist. At least it doesn't exist for me. Unless they're all underground somewhere, I don't know.
Hiding in a cave.
Well, I wouldn't put it past them. It could be possible.
Where does the term toxic masculinity actually come from, and why is it that we're living in a universe where that's widespread and not #toxic femininity?
I think there's a theory called the women are wonderful effect, which basically a theory that suggests that we associate good things to women and bad things to men. So they'll do stuff like they'll release 2 series of scientific papers, both are fake. One of them has positive things about men, like men are better leaders. The other one, same, but for women. Women are better leaders. And they'd give both papers to different subjects, and people routinely enjoyed the women's papers, but found the men's papers offensive and upsetting. And it's called the women are wonderful effect. So it's not hard to go from there to understand why we would never and should never label femininity as toxic. But the original concept of toxic masculinity, in my opinion, had some use to it. It came out of the mythopoetic men's movement in the 90s, which is basically a bunch of like hippie men that are all about like love and togetherness, especially fatherhood. They really believe in fatherhood and the power of fatherhood, as do I. And they felt toxic masculinity was basically what was left behind from absent fathering. And I find a lot of what they're saying, like Shepherd Bliss, who coined it, I find a lot of what they're saying useful. Like, that is actually useful, and it's completely antithetical to our current perspective of the problem, where we think masculinity is the problem. But for them, they felt masculinity was the solution. Like, the lack of masculinity in these boys' lives was sort of shaping these behaviours. Like, if you look at gangs, like classic toxic masculinity, knife crime in London, impossible not to talk about it. But so many of these boys come from fatherless homes. So I'm like, well, if so many of these boys come from fatherless homes, then is masculinity really the problem, or is it the lack of masculinity, or the lack of the right kind of masculinity? And is the solution more fatherhood, more healthy fatherhood, more masculinity? So yeah, toxic masculinity from the original concept, from the mythopoetic men's movement, changed now. Just used as a catch-all slogan just to blame men quite literally for everything. Carol Harrington, who's a researcher, she went through and actually looked at studies of toxic masculinity, and she found more than half of them didn't even define what it was. Like, didn't even say what this thing was. It's just, in her words, it's used just to signal disapproval, just to attach men to as many bad things as possible. Toxic masculinity causes meat eating. Toxic masculinity causes knife crime. Toxic masculinity causes the climate crisis. Donald Trump, Brexit, the economic crash of 2007, not recycling, climate change. Absolutely ridiculous. How could something that caused Brexit also be causing men not to recycle? Like, it's obscene, and it doesn't mean anything, and it's not supposed to mean anything. It just signals disapproval.
But why is it that people keep on returning time and time again on these varied issues, from Trump to Brexit to toxic masculinity? What's in it for them? What's the incentive there?
Prestige, social currency, like looking good, virtue. Like, they want to look good. They want to, like, this idea of, it's not just about correcting people's behavior. They want to be seen to correct people's behavior. Like, Jonathan Haidt talks about this, and he had a complaint. He said something in a lecture and someone didn't like it. And instead of quietly talking to him afterwards, being, hey, Jonathan, I sort of thought what we said was a bit inappropriate, and they could have a constructive conversation. They didn't say anything, and they went home and posted it on Facebook, and they made a massive big deal because they didn't really care, in my opinion. They just wanted to look like they care, and they wanted the prestige of taking his scalp, basically. And it's just about looking good. I don't think these people really care about any of these issues. They just want to stamp on men and look good doing it. That's been my experience. Because the work of actually understanding what shapes violence, such as fatherlessness, and we can go into more, is unpopular and very ugly. And like you said, there's no money to be made here. It's the ugly side of advocacy. And people don't want to do that. They want to just prance around talking about toxic masculinity and the patriarchy, which is just, who knows what you're on about. And they want to, it's not about doing good for them, it's about looking good. And I think that's what it's all about.
Well, let's delve into that. What is the current state of fatherlessness in the West?
I mean, in America, 1 in 4 boys is growing up without any male role model at home. So no father at all. So millions of boys, millions and millions. And then of those boys, they go to school, and in school, 80% of teachers are women. So only 1/5 of those boys have any male sort of role model. So there's millions and millions and millions and millions of boys. No role model at home, no father, no one at school, no primary male role model whatsoever. And if you actually look at that group, that's so overwhelmingly from that group come like perpetrators of violent crime, dropouts, people that die from suicide, people that are addicted to drugs, like everything bad can come from that group. Obviously not everyone that has no father is going to do those things, but you're disproportionately more likely to do those things if you come from that group. And like gangs, for example, like without a father, many boys go looking for family elsewhere, go looking for that role model elsewhere, leadership, but sense of belonging and purpose. So there's no father at home to give it to them. So they'll go out and find a family elsewhere. They'll pick up a knife and they'll go and join a gang. And gangs exploit those boys because they know they're vulnerable, and they'll target them. And not just like gangs in London, but like things like ISIS. There've been studies of ISIS, and they overwhelmingly targeted those boys. White supremacists, the same. If you look at school shooters, like such a high percent, got to be over 90% of school shooters in America come from fatherless homes. And it's impossible to ignore. And I feel like we want to ignore it because it places the blame on single mothers, which I don't think is fair. I don't blame single mothers. But we do need to look at the importance of fathers in homes and the damage of not having fathers has without it blaming single mothers. And like we can't shy away from that because it is a hard discussion. And fatherhood has just been like insulted and derided and diminished in the media by our politicians. My old local MP, Harriet Harman, horrible person, she wrote in a political paper that fatherhood isn't essential to harmonious family life. She wrote that down and used it to lobby government to remove fathers' rights in 1989. And I'm like, she is was a very senior politician, and she really did a lot to hurt fathers, both in writing and behind the scenes in legislation. And like, turn on the TV, like who's on in our cartoons, sitcoms, like you got Homer Simpson, you got Hal, you got Peter Griffin, like gone are the days of Mr. Rogers, who was a wonderful archetype of fatherhood and manliness. And now we've got these oafs. TV, like advertisements no different. Like the Advertising Standards Authority have now stepped in to stop brands from deriding fathers, hapless dads, oafs, to stop them actually now banning adverts because they just present dads as this completely inept. And it's, again, very antithetical because on one hand, we're asking fathers to do more, but on the other hand, we're insulting them. It's like, you can't ask for equal responsibility without equal respect and also equal rights. Like, fathers don't have equal rights in this country, and yet we're demanding them, they give us equal responsibility. But you can't have responsibility without rights. So my point is there's a lot missing from the conversation around fatherhood.
There's that cognitive dissonance of saying that men need to do more, but then that all male role models are toxic and a bad influence.
Yeah. Or like, men can talk, but then you talk about things like male victims of abuse, and then you're told to shut up. Or like, well, I want to talk about experiences of abuse. I want to talk about experiences of sexual violence towards men. And they can't talk about that. Incel, shut up. The misogynist, this isn't about you, this is about women. The amount of times I've been told to shut up, whilst also being told to talk. I'm like, if I'm going to talk, I'll talk about what I choose, and you don't get to decide what I talk about. Nor do other men. Like recently, I was contacted by someone who follows me, called Rory, who tried to set up a men's network at Loughborough University, and the Students' Union were very on board with it because male students are twice at risk of suicide as female students. Boys are behind at every stage of education. Men are at really high risk of drug addiction, alcohol. Anyway, a men's group to discuss these things. SU was on board, great. Got announced like a literal space for men to talk. And the backlash was unbelievable. I've never seen anything quite like it. The comments were outrageous. And that's when I'm like, those are the people I'm afraid of. I'm glad they've not found me. But it was hostile, so hostile. And they actually cancelled the whole thing before it even started for fears of the physical safety of Rory. Like they were actually afraid of him. And I'm like, that's an extremist political group on campus. And that's the problem. What Rory's doing is great and it might actually save lives. Apart from it won't, it's cancelled. Like the problem is the extremist political group making threats. Like you would not do that. If there was like someone making threats towards like the gay society, you would not cancel the gay society. You would like get those people off of camp, get the police involved maybe. And like it's not an isolated matter. I know of one similar thing where they went into primary schools to educate boys and they got closed down on the charge of domestic terrorism. Because what they were doing to boys was considered domestic terrorism. What they were basically going in and spreading propaganda, brainwashing boys in the opposite way to Andrew Tate, who's also brainwashing boys, but they were brainwashing boys in the opposite ways. You're a rapist in waiting. You're a man. That you're an oppressor, and they no longer exist because they were closed down. And I was like, that is a bold charge, and I sort of agree with it. And at what point is it domestic terrorism to shout down these societies and deprive men and boys of the very thing that might actually save their lives? Like, fact is, the greatest risk to your life and my life and your life over there is suicide. You wake up tomorrow, same again, every single day until you're 50. One of the best ways of combating suicide is friendship, networks, men's spaces. But those are the very things that are being shouted down. So it's like not only do you have to deal with suicide, the threat of suicide, but the very thing that might actually serve as an antidote to that very problem is also being taken away. And you're an incel if you don't like that. So yeah, it makes your head spin, to be honest.
I'm 19 years old. The biggest risk to me would be suicide.
Yep.
How much of that risk would be reduced just from me talking to friends?
I mean, no one could ever put a number on that, but I do know that one of my friends, Susie Bennett, who is, in my opinion, one of the most important male suicide researchers in the world, amazing woman, she did recently put together an agenda of male suicide research. So she wanted to ask lived experience experts from all over the world, like hundreds of them, bereaved families, men who are dealing with suicide, and clinical experts, to put together an agenda of research into male suicide. Like, what are the questions you want answering? Like, what are the main priorities? She wasn't asking academics. She wasn't asking like university professors. She was asking suicidal men, bereaved families, clinical experts. And 99% of them endorsed as very important male loneliness. That was the most important research question she got back. Loneliness. And it's so important and a massive problem, and only exacerbated further by the shaming and hostility towards the same spaces. So I'd say very important. I can never put a percentage on it, but a huge bite would be taken out of the problem for sure.
Do you think though that talking can really prevent suicide, or is it more looking at the variables in your life that haven't been going your way?
Talking certainly helps you deal with the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem. Like if I'm lost my job, I've broken up my girlfriend, I'm in debt, I can't pay the mortgage. These are the sort of things that cause men over a long period of time to end their life by suicide. Talking about that's not going to pay the mortgage or bring your girlfriend back or, bring your child back into your home. But it might help you deal with the problem. So it's very important, and you're right to bring that up, that talking is great. It helps you deal with the problem, doesn't solve the problem. Like, quoting Susie again, we talked about it, about suicide is a bit like a pot of boiling water on a hob. And the water's boiling up, the lid is on, and it's going to overflow. Talking takes the lid off the pot, and the bubbling comes down, it breathes, it quietens down a little bit. Unfortunately, the lid has to go back on. And the heat's still the same. So it's not turn the heat off. So the solution is surely turning the heat off and taking the lid off as well. Yeah. And the heat is a series of different things, like so many things, like experiences of abuse, family breakdown. A lot, like 20% of suicides in the UK are linked to child custody battles. So a lot of fathers losing their children in family courts, like the thing that's most important to them, that probably comes alongside a breakdown of a relationship and maybe leaving their home. I'm like, suicide actually seems like a rational decision in that case. They're not mentally ill. He's literally lost the most important thing in his life, and suicide is just sort of, I heard it described as a solution-based outcome. And mental health is obviously important in moderating that, but it's not the cause. and it can't be solved through talking. It can only be dealt with by talking. Talking is just like a short-term solution until a long-term solution comes along.
You often hear about sexual abuse on feminist Instagram stories.
Yeah.
How common is it in men to experience sexual abuse?
1 in 6 men probably experience sexual abuse. I mean, it really depends. Like, you see different numbers. You'll see like 1 in 6, 1 in 9. I've read something like 73% have been sexually victimized by a woman. But sexually victimized is not the same as sexually abused. So if we're talking about...
What's the difference?
Well, it's the difference between harassment and assault. Like, me shouting catcall at a woman is sexual harassment. Me going and grabbing her bum is assault. So obviously, I think it's about 71% of men in the UK have been sexually victimized by a woman. And then 1 in 6 have been sexually abused in their lifetime. So, I mean, it doesn't matter which way you look at it, it's still a huge amount of men and boys. And like, again, like just like domestic violence, experience of sexual abuse, especially in boyhood, your times in that boy's rate of attempting suicide by 10. Like, his rate of suicide goes up significantly if he's had experience of sexual abuse in adolescence. And like I said, like, another thing I find so sad is they looked into bullying and they found that 97% of the most bullied boys in school went on to have fantasies of violence. So violent fantasies is another, like a calling card of so-called toxic masculinity. But if you actually look at what shapes violent fantasies, often it's bullying. So 97% of the most bullied boys had violent fantasies. And they theorized that these fantasies were actually a coping mechanism boys developed to deal with violence to come. So they basically fantasizing about violence as a means of dealing with the violence being inflicted upon them. And that, again, it spins your head. And so-called this idea of calling that boy toxic is horrible. And he is a victim in his own right. And the man he becomes, who goes on to have violent fantasies, is also a victim. And if you cannot look at men in that way, you should just step out the conversation. Because it's not about just blaming men for being men. It's about looking at men as human beings and shaped by their experiences, no less than anyone else.
What role do you think the internet plays in all of this? You see groups emerging like Men Go Their Own Way and these incel forums. And from what I've heard about them, there's almost this incentive to stay sexless if you're in those communities, because once you do achieve success, you're ostracized and you're kicked out of the group.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different online groups like this. Yeah, MGTOWs. Basically, it all becomes part of the red pill. And the red pill, in my opinion, is divided into 4 groups. So you have the men's rights activists, which people can say I am, but I'm not. And they're trying to change the system. They're trying to change laws. They're trying to change structures and policy. They're trying to get more funding for men abused. They're doing that good work. After that, you have the pickup artists, and they're trying to exploit the system. They like the way it's set up, and they're trying to use it to their advantage to have sex with women. Andrew Tate is my opinion. He is a pickup artist. And then you have the MGTOWs and the incels, and they're trying to leave the system. They don't like the system in the same way that men's rights activists don't, but they're just trying to leave it. They're like, I'm out. MGTOW means men going their own way, which quite literally means they're just done. They don't date women. They don't hang out with women. They don't sleep with women, and they're just done. They're a bit like the ironic thing is, there's a massive wing of feminism that's exactly the same, the feminist separatist society. They even went so far as to try and force lesbianism on their members, because they were so sick of men. They're like, we're going to be lesbians and we're going to become, which is so insulting to lesbian women to be used like that. But yeah, it's interesting how there's the exact same reflection of women and feminist separatists. They're done with men as well, just like the MGTOWs.
Do you think that we're maybe panicking about this just because it's on show for us now that we have the internet and it existed before the internet? Or do you think there's been a genuine rise?
Nah, I mean both. It's absolutely amplified. I talked earlier about just because you're the loudest doesn't mean you're the majority. And the same, like, you read these horrific things from incels, but that doesn't mean they're the majority of men. Like the things that you read online, in the same way that from women, they're just a minority of loud women. The men that saying horrible things, they're just a minority of loud men. Like, their assholes, in my opinion, are equally distributed, and they're disproportionately loud. So like, there are asshole men, there are asshole women, there are assholes in every single group. And we've got to remind ourselves, it's not about women versus men, it's the assholes versus everyone else. And there are all people on both sides of that divide. And I'm more than happy to say there are asshole men. Of course there are, but there are plenty of asshole women too. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think, the amount of hysteria and pearl clutching around this manosphere is overblown and a distraction. And if we are going to learn from the manosphere, it should be done as a way of understanding how badly we failed men and boys. Like Andrew Tate, his success is proportionate to our failure. So as badly as he's done great, because we've left these boys and men behind, and he's just stepped into that vacuum, because he does speak positively about masculinity, not in the right way, and I don't really support anything he says, but at least he's positive about masculinity. He presents it as a positive thing. And I'm like, obviously impressionable men and boys are going to gravitate towards that because they're so like deprived of it everywhere else. So they're constantly surrounded by this nonsense, like toxic masculinity, male oppression, male violence, the patriarchy, male fragility, blah, 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 blah. Like, obviously they're going to gravitate towards someone that's actually kind to them. It's a shame that person's also exploiting them. And like, take every opportunity I can to say Andrew Tate is an asshole, total asshole. But he is a lesson can be learned from him. And that is how badly we failed.
What you're spelling out to me there is that Andrew Tate and the people were like, they're not a cause of the problems we're seeing today, but maybe a symptom.
Yeah, there's a quote. A quote, and I can't quite get it verbatim, but it's something like, when the responsible parties refuse to talk about a problem, the irresponsible ones will. So that's what's happened. Like, we don't want to talk about any of the things I talk about. We don't want to talk about what bullying does to men and boys. We don't want to talk about male victims of abuse or male victims of sexual violence. We don't want to talk about men as disadvantaged in any single way. So if someone else does, they're going to reap the rewards, aren't they? They're going to step into that. So yeah, if we can't talk about this in a responsible way, as I'm trying to, then someone else will. So the conversation doesn't end just because you're not having it. Someone else will have the conversation, but in a much worse way. And someone, not Andrew Tate, maybe someone worse. Who knows? And like, what are we waiting for? Like, we need to have this conversation in a responsible way, because that's the best way of eliminating people like Andrew Tate. Like, those boys can be won back, but only won back through kindness and by change. Because the way we talk about men and boys is awful, truly awful, shameful, and not good enough. So we need to do better to bring those boys back.
Andrew Clavin talks about how when masculinity is outlawed, only the outlaws are brave enough to be masculine.
Yeah, that's a much better way of putting it. Perfect. Yeah.
And I've seen that in my generation. It feels like, and we know this from stats, that there's now a bifurcation, a divide of men and women, that women are getting ever more liberal and that men are getting ever more conservative. They're getting entrenched in this viewpoint.
That's purely for selfish reasons. Politicians should be writing policy for men and boys. Like, we're going to the American election now, which is probably going to be the most gendered election ever in the way you described. Women voting for Kamala, men voting for Trump. I would vote for Kamala every day of the week, just to be clear. But if the Democrats or the Labour Party don't start appealing to men and boys and the very real structural issues they are impacted by that are far outside of these toxic masculinity, the patriarchy hurts men too nonsense, then they're going to lose those votes forever. Like, last election we had, didn't vote for anyone. Went and sport my ballot. Never done that before. I've only ever voted Labour. I was a Labour member at one point, and I went and voted for no one. And I'll be doing that every single election until I see change. And I'm not the only one. Like, there are so many boys, men, young men and boys on the left, centre left especially, that just feel totally betrayed by the Labour Party, the Democrats, and the Conservatives and the Republicans too, but mostly by the left. And they are just votes that are winning, that can be scooped up. Someone can scoop those up quite easily. And that is an election winner. Like, the elections are won by a tiny, tiny margin now. And like, that could be the difference, those boys and men. Like, so I don't, even selfishly, it's within politicians' own self-interest to write policy for boys and men, because there are none. I went through all the manifestos this year, nothing for men and boys. A lot of policies for women and girls, nothing for men and boys.
There's not even a minister for men and boys, is there?
No, definitely not. No way. We have a minister for women, a minister for women's health, and an ambassador for women's health, which is great. Like, more the merrier. But none of those exist for men. And if we're talking about health, like, men's health is worse than women's health in this country by practically every single metric. And there was no ministerial position to help them out. 2 for women, none for men. So that's the problem. And like, yeah, minister for men, just a generalized minister for men, that's quite a contentious suggestion. One I support, big time. Because we need someone to investigate these issues in a way that's actually funded and meaningful and responsible. So just for the whole reason I gave, it shouldn't be down to people like me on Instagram, sat on their laptop trying to do their very best with no money whatsoever. Like, this should be done by politicians academics, researchers, scientists, advocates, not by me. But I am, unfortunately, the best you've got right now. So I would love to see Minister for Men, because then I could put my feet up a little bit and be like, oh, finally, thank you. But yeah, most people don't support it still. When I started talking about Minister for Men in 2019, people thought it was hilarious. But now 50% of people in the UK think we need one. And I reckon in a few more years, that's going to go over to 60, 70, 80. And then eventually we will get one. But it's like, how many more men and boys have to die? Like by suicide, for example. Like that should be the first, second, third priority for Minister for Men. Like that is a massive crisis. And men's health is even bigger, really. Like, I think it's like 15 men die young every single hour in the UK. 15 men. So that's going to be 15 by the time this podcast is over. And those lives, most of them could have been saved. They're dying from causes that we could have avoided, but we've chosen not to because there was no funding for men's health. Like the concept of men's health doesn't even exist. It's actually, people find it insulting to say a minister for men's health. So in many ways, we're a long way off, but slowly changing. And yeah, like men's health is in the toilet. Wes Streeting of Labour promised to write a men's health strategy, but he never did. He never actually did it. Talk is cheap, as they say. He said he would, he didn't. And in fact, the Labour manifesto quite clearly says we are prioritising women's health. So what sort of patriarchy does that, I suppose? Like what sort of patriarchy watches men die more at every age than women and then yet prioritises women's health? Doesn't make sense.
Stick with me on the political point, because I haven't actually thought about the Kamala versus Trump situation in terms of what it means for men and women. How do you see a Kamala win, who's clearly campaigning on the fact that she's a woman and a black woman of that? To me, I've seen it multiple times on her Twitter or whatever. You know, first female president. How does that impact the culture if she does win?
I think her gender's kind of arbitrary, as is her race. Like, I don't understand why everyone's obsessed about that. Like, what matters is her policy. This is what people get mixed up. They seem to think that just because men are being in charge, and you're right, first president potentially as a woman. We've only ever had male presidents and one black male president. But people seem to think that translates into advantages for normal men, which is where the patriarchy concept comes from. They think men in power must mean men are advantaged across society, which is not true. Ironically, it's the opposite. Men in power are the ones writing gender legislation, such as the Minister for Men. In America, it's worse. I think there's 7, maybe even 8 offices for women's health. They recently announced a new one. Biden, the White House Commission on Women and Girls Health, I think is. None for men. 0 for men. 8 for women. Like, all different government-funded departments, tens of millions of dollars funding every single year. Wonderful. But in America, men lead in 14 of the top 15 causes of death. So pretty much all of them. They die at a rate 1.4 times higher than women and have worse health outcomes than women across every single ethnic, racial, socio-economic group. And there was no office for men's health. None. No real discussion for it either. So I couldn't care less about Kamala's gender or the colour of her skin. I do care about her policy, but I do not expect her to create an office for men's health, unfortunately. And like I said, I'm very much supportive of the 7 or 8 departments like that exist for women. They're doing great work. And it's important that they continue to exist, but we need to do the same level of ambition and compassion for men.
It just frustrates me so much, that natural tendency we seem to have nowadays to label everything. I think it gives us a lot of comfort to put ourselves into tribes and to, as you said, label Kamala Harris as a black woman. She can't just be a competent individual. It's wild.
It's what you achieve though. What are your actual credentials? What are your quality? Who are you? What are your ideas? Are you a good person? It's like, like I said, I don't care what your genitals look like or what colour your skin is. That doesn't mean you're a good or bad person. It means nothing to me. Like doesn't mean you're any more capable of good or bad if you're a woman or a man. Like, we're essentially all human beings. And it's like, what your ideas and policy that defines you.
We've touched a little bit on suicide, and you've sort of diagnosed some of the issues at hand there. What's some of the low-hanging fruits that we could instantly snap up to prevent those 15 deaths in the UK that would have happened by the time this podcast's over?
15, that's men's health. That's not suicide. So that's men dying young from preventable illnesses that they might have been able to treat had they been more adequately looked after. Suicide, I think it's about 4,000 men die by suicide every single year. So it's significant. It's the highest
in the UK.
So greatest risk to my life right now, every man's life, every young man's life in the UK. What can we do to win? Quick wins, I would say. Something's got to be done about family courts. The way fathers are treated and deprived of their children in this country is leading to suicides, like significant, like 20%, apparently, according to Martin Seeger. Male suicides are connected to family courts. So if we fix the family court system, we can potentially reduce male suicide by 20%. Like, not overnight, but quickly. And overall, just adopting a mindset that men aren't just dying by suicide for no reason or because some sort of chemical imbalance or not enough crying and or talking. They're dying because of the very real structural external problems placing pressure upon them. And one of them is family courts. One of them is domestic violence. So there is practically no shelter for male victims of abuse in this country, despite men making up 1 in 3 of all victims of intimate partner violence. And 11% of men who experience abuse will consider suicide. So if you're adding that up in like rough maths, like there's 4 million men who are abused in their lifetime in this country. 11% of them will consider suicide. So that's huge. They can all be saved potentially. And just more kindness towards men would be nice, I think. Like kinder words. Like everyone like probably rolling their eyes at that idea, but I promise you, like there is so much hostility towards men, so much negativity. Like, yeah. So family courts, more provision for male victims of abuse, greater understanding of sexual violence on boys and how it shapes suicidality later in life. Joblessness is a big one. I think it's like one in 5 suicides in America is attached to joblessness or debt. So like a lot of financial insecurity. One of the most at-risk groups of suicide in this country is like working class construction workers living often up north in sort of small rural towns, because their back-breaking work does quite literally break their back. They get to about 50, they can't work in construction anymore, and they quit. They rack up debt. They've got no more qualifications. They've got a family they're responsible for, mortgage they can't pay. They kill themselves. And like, I have never heard of construction workers included in any sort of discussion around male suicide, and yet they are probably the most at-risk group right now in this country. Like the whole mental health sector is taken up by like good-looking celebrity men with man buns, and I'm like, what do you know about anything to do with male suicide? Nothing. Like these extraordinarily economically powerful men, like Justin Baldoni, like wringing his hands and crying over, like, what do you actually know? Like, you know nothing about men. And like the actual men that are at risk of suicide, that construction worker living in Newcastle, whose back's given out and can't actually afford healthcare, like that's the real at-risk group, not these podcasters. No offense.
What do you think to someone like Dr. Alex George, who had that campaign of Post Your Pill, sort of encouraging everyone to post their mental health medication?
I mean, I can only speak about that in a conjecture-based way. I don't know. I am apprehensive around the dangers of SSRIs. I have a friend of a friend who recently died by suicide as a result of the prescription he was put on for bipolar disorder. Just jumped off Dover Cliff a few weeks ago. So, and that was directly caused by side effects of his medication. So I think I have 2 points of view there. I can't quite work out how they balance, but one point of view is that I think we do need to destigmatize people that are mentally unwell and medicated, taking medication. There's no shame around that, and that's important. But at the same time, we need to simultaneously recognize there are actual dangers, like actual side effects. Like suicide is an actual side effect for a lot of SSRIs, and they can be very dangerous. So, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about it though.
Yeah. Well, you say you don't know a huge amount about it, but now I'm going to push you a little bit more. You're welcome, mate. Do you feel like we live in a culture where mental health issues are potentially overprescribed to people that aren't experiencing something pathological, rather they're just going through tough times? Yeah.
Like, I'm going to talk about Susie again, only because she's got so much experience working with suicidal men. And she, like, the overwhelming things she learned from, because she's a woman, she doesn't know this directly, but she would talk to the men that are suicidal, and she would hear about their lives and be like, you're not mentally unwell, your life is just fucked. And like, I'm not surprised you don't want to be here anymore. And like, I think these men find that very validating, to know that what you're going through is hard, and you're reacting in a normal way to an abnormal set of experiences in a way that most people would. You're not mentally unwell. You don't need to be medicated. You don't need to pathologize masculinity as something that's toxic to be expunged. You need to just recognize that men are vulnerable human beings that respond to the difficulties of life in a perfectly normal way. And sometimes we mix that up with mental health problems. But the fact of the matter is, most men that are suicidal don't consider the problem they have as being a mental health problem. They have like a money problem or family problem or child custody problem or joblessness problem. So yes, I think we eat too easy just to say mental health problem, prescribe some drugs. Because it's easy. What's difficult is actually listening to those men and understanding why they feel that way. Because often the reasons for them feeling that way are perfectly valid and understandable.
Someone like Jonathan Haidt or Freya India diagnose all these issues to be linked with the rise of social media. And you see from 2012, when Instagram really starts popping off and you have that switch from a chronological timeline to just recommended timelines. So you get the influencers with six-pack abs nonstop and driving fast cars. How do you see this unfolding? Do you see in the next decade there could be a reversal if there's more people like the Tin Men promoting the other side? Or do you think it's only going to get worse and there's going to be even more overdiagnosis of issues?
Yes, I mean, Jonathan Haidt's work's great. I'm reading his book right now. Excellent. Social media is very much a net negative, especially for young people, especially girls. We talked about toxic femininity, which, like I said, do not endorse, but the experience of young girls on social media, the bullying and harassment they go through from other girls is horrendous. And that is, in my opinion, and Jonathan Haidt's talked about this, that is leading to a spike in suicides in young girls, which we're seeing in America right now. He theorized that's down to bullying. Because in bullying in school, I was bullied in school by both women, both girls and boys. But you leave school and it's over. You're like, oh, okay, right. At least I've got a little bit of respite from that. Social media, not the case. Like, you can get bullied 24/7 with complete anonymity. And that is leading to suicides. Social media, and that's actual bullying. And then I guess there's the more abstract idea of you're comparing your life to someone else's highlight reels. Like my girlfriend, she's doing really well now, but she was struggling with work last year. And she got on LinkedIn and she went, everyone's so successful, great campaigns, great projects. What this amazing portfolio they've done, promotion, they've just got a job. And she's like, I've not got any of that. And like that would obviously devastate your mental health because you're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlights. And like, I don't post anything on social media apart from the Tin Men. And I try not to spend any time on it either because it's hard, really hard. So I'd love us to be more honest on social media. Just I had a shit day. I didn't do anything. Look at my breakfast. It's just a boring bowl of granola. And I think people appreciate that. But it is hard. And yeah, it's hard for me as well because obviously what I write about is heavy. And although the comments and messages are nice, it's still topics are heavy. So yeah, I suppose I'm a bit of an exception to the rule because the things that make me depressed are actually really depressing.
There's the downside of social media just showing highlight reels, but also there's the upside of incredible accounts like yours being able to grow and promote their message. How have you seen your account impacting the culture and maybe individuals at the top of the podcast game or celebrities?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm like an outside member of a circle of mostly men that are doing really good work, like Chris Williamson, trigonometry, of course. Like, there are things I'm putting out that are being absorbed by people like Chris, and he's putting some out himself. That's being absorbed by someone else, and that's like we're building like a critical mass of speakers, and I think it's really helpful. Like there's many things I put out that I've seen reflected back to me, and I'm not pissed off they're not stolen it, but I'm touched and flattered that I can have an influence behind the scenes on other people. Like there are celebrities that have genuinely changed their mind. Like people with significantly more influence than I have that are just like, I've totally changed my mind. I don't consider myself a feminist anymore. I understand how harmful these ideas of patriarchy. Like one person wrote an article for The Guardian saying toxic masculinity kills, and then 5 years later, after following me, he hates that term. Like he hates that term for the reasons I've already given. And it's those secondary reverberant impacts I have that I'm most proud of. Like I love my content, but It's the fact that people are reading them and going on having conversations or challenging people or doing a presentation in school or setting up a students' union network or quoting it or all these different things. And like, that's what I'm proud of. Like the stuff I'm indirectly helping with, supporting.
Yeah, well, take me through that timeline of the Tin Men a little bit more. How have you seen things change in terms of the messages you receive, the responses people give over the years that you've ran the page? How long have you been running it for?
I started it in 2020, really. So over lockdown, as a filmmaker, as you well know, like it sort of stopped. The film industry just stopped in 2020 because there's none of this. So I'm a bit addicted to the creative process. I just wanted to create content. I'd always found men and boys advocacy interesting, mainly because it was so hated and like everyone hated talking about it. And then I just started reading it and it blew my mind. I'd read stuff and it would just blow my mind. Like everything, like boys behind in education at every level in more or less every Western country for 30 consecutive years. And I was just like, why is that not the headline of every newspaper every day till it's fixed? That's just one issue. Addiction, homelessness, domestic violence, sexual abuse, all of these things blew my mind. And I was like, well, I'm going to start. At this point, I was a feminist and I was a progressive and a Labour voter. And I was having conversations with similarly minded people. And what they were saying was just not lining up with what I was learning. And I would have it beneath the table, quite literally, like my phone, as the Tin Men wasn't supposed to be for other people to have it. And I'd be like, well, why are we talking about violence against women when 4 in 5 murders worldwide are against men? Why is that? And then it was their lack of response, or not lack of an appropriate response that really, like, not upset me, but spurred me on. Like, finger in the face, shouting, "You, George, you are just, it's not about that. You just don't understand." And I was like, "You've not answered my question. And you can't answer my question because this is a fact. And what you're saying is emotional, sort of pearl clutching." So, yeah. And then I started just creating content just as an archive for my own use. And then people started following. And I was like, I best dress this up a little bit. And then, yeah, at the beginning, it was hard. I got a lot of hostility at the beginning. There's no way around that. Most people hated it. And like my comments. So if you can go down and look at it yourself, like if you go right to the bottom, there's so much vitriol. And I found that motivating too. Like people like sending me all sorts of threats. You stop doing it. And I was like, I'm actually now going to do it more. Like I used to post just like 2 or 3 times a week. Then I started posting 5 times a week. And then they kept saying, stop doing it. And I was like, I'm going to post 7 days a week. And then at one point I was posting twice a day, every day, just because people hated it so much. And because I'm so stubborn, I was like, I'm actually going to do it more because I will post about what I want. And you don't get to decide what I say or don't say. And then at that point, it was just too much. So to keep the quality high, I had to post fewer times and twice a day. It was ridiculous. And people follow. Like I've had amazing support from different celebrities and political thinkers and podcasters who've discussed and genuinely changing people's minds in ways that I never could have dreamt of, and I'm extremely proud of. And now I'm getting to like this in person. I'm very apprehensive about having my face and my voice, but whatever. Like I've got nothing to hide. When I first started doing podcasts, when I first started doing this, people were saying you should pixelate your face and hide your voice so you sound like a robot. And I was like, well, then I just look like a criminal. I look guilty. I look like a literal criminal. And I was like, there's nothing to hide. I'm not doing anything wrong. So here's my face. I won't give you my full name, but yeah, I'm more active and more visible. I want to do more campaigning, so going beyond where I am now, more physical campaigning, not just complaining on Instagram constantly. I want to do physical campaigns. I want to get in people's faces. I've already launched my first campaign, really exciting, for the Minister for Men. And I want to keep doing that, keep like doing my own podcasts, interviewing people that are just way more experienced than me. Like my expertise are in getting the best out of people, presenting information in the most compelling way possible, especially visually. I'm not got a PhD. I'm a Bachelor of Arts. I'm not even from a good university. But I can communicate. I do know how to communicate with others. I do know how to take someone else's boring academic research paper and make it compelling. So I will talk to them. So I interviewed Richard Reeves last week, who's the president of the AIBM, a wonderful guy. Interviewing Don Dutton, who's the world's leading researcher in family violence this week. And I just want to keep doing that. I want to keep just lifting people up, people that I admire, people who have important voice, who have been sort of pushed aside, and then give them the microphone a little bit. Because a bit like Justin Baldoni, I've lived a more or less privileged life. Like I've had difficult times, but I consider myself very lucky that I don't have as many first-hand experiences of what I talk about as some of the people I know. So I would rather give the microphone to someone else who can speak with more intelligence and eloquence than I can. And I'll be behind the scenes making sure it's presented in a way that's compelling. So yeah, I want to put as many men in the spotlight as possible, and then eventually make some sort of documentary. If that's the plan, basically. But who knows? It changes every day.
Often conversations like these are prefaced with, this is an important conversation because it's important to women, and actually lifting up men lifts up women too.
Yeah.
Which is true. I've seen you purposely avoid talking about that.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to reconcile two things there. Like, first of all, people like to round off the corners of these discussions. Like every few years, the CDC releases the figures on victims of intimate partner violence as part of the National Intimate Partner Sexual Violence Survey. And like every year, I'm like dreading the years where there are more male victims of abuse than female, such as this year. And that comes out and I'm like, oh, it's going to be so unpopular. But I put out nonetheless. You have to remind me of the question again.
So you purposely avoid prefacing everything with, we should do this because it's good for women.
Rounding off the edges. So I don't want to round off the edges. I want to just hold up a mirror to society, and whatever reflects back in that mirror is not my fault. Like, and if you don't like what you see, that is not my fault either, and you just got to deal with that. So I will just present to you the data from the CDC, from the ONS, from the UN, from the World Health Organization. I'll just present the keys I use most on my keyboard, copy and paste. That's essentially what I'm doing with a bit of dressing up, but I'm just copying and pasting. So I don't want to round off the edges. I don't want to pull any punches or water down what I'm saying for someone else's comfort, because that is not what advocacy is about. It's not about being easy. It's about being hard. It's about sitting in the discomfort and lying down on a bed of nails. And not a lot of people do that, which is where people sort of apologize. So I don't want to do that. But at the same time, I also want to recognize that these are unpopular things to say. And if I can get more people listening to me by being a little bit more palatable, a little bit more sophisticated, then I will. I'm not going to needlessly antagonize someone for no reason, but I don't want to diminish what I'm saying, because I feel like those who start these conversations with a litany of apologies and small print and disclaimers and, oh yes, what I'm saying about men and boys doesn't diminish what's happening to women and girls, and this is also going to help women and girls, and we're going to help make better male allies for women and girls, and women and girls experience this. I might just shut up. Like, doesn't need to be apologized for, doesn't need to be framed as a benefit to women and girls. Like, men and boys deserve this in their own right. So I'm very apprehensive around this kissing the ring or sweetening the pill or paying penance to some sort of feminist overlord. Like, please let me speak about it. I don't care. I don't ask for permission, but I will speak in a way that I find responsible and accurate in the mirror. Like, that's all I want to do. Hold up a mirror and you can figure out what's looking back. But yeah, it frustrates me, and you don't see it anywhere else. This is one of the things I disagree with on Richard Reeves, and I do think I've changed his mind. You should interview him, by the way. He's great. And he's talking to Scott Galloway about it, and Scott Galloway's like, well, yeah, when we talk about racism, it's not against white people, and and this whole, like, just because talking about men and boys doesn't mean you don't care about women and girls, just rings of the whole I'm not a racist. But I'm like, well, if you're not a racist, don't fucking say it. Like, I don't need to prove myself. It's a bit like the beef burger. Like, I don't need to be told it's 100% beef. Like, that is why I bought it. I don't need to prove myself. I don't need to present my virtue and my morality. I'll just present the facts, and I won't give you an apology. So don't ask for one.
I guess, to play devil's advocate, they might fear that by you unapologetically just focusing on men, that is maybe reminiscent of the culture of women starting feminist pages and only thinking about women.
Yeah, it's a fair point. But that is a good point. But I suppose I'm trying to balance it out. Like, there are so many pages that talk exclusively about women and girls, and very few that talk about men and boys, and fewer still that talk about it on the left, and fewer still that talk about men and boys on the left outside of a feminist framework. So I agree. Like, I would much rather prefer to have the tin people, where I can talk about women and men. I don't live as a woman. I don't know much about women's issues. I'm more of a listener when it comes to women's advocacy. I don't want to speak for women, but I will sit down and listen and shut up and learn. So yeah, I'd much prefer to have a more balanced approach. But unfortunately, the environment we're in is like this. Like, it's already like steeped against men in the area of advocacy. So I guess I'm trying to address that, compensate for the pendulum being swung too far. But I agree, yeah, it's a good criticism, and one I do actually accept.
One thing I fear is coming across as complaining a lot about things, rightly so, that men go through without addressing that maybe, in my opinion, I think some issues are just down to men needing to be better as well. Would you agree with that analysis, that there are certain things going wrong where we just do need to take a bit more responsibility?
Well, maybe, yeah, sure, but it's kind of abstract. What do you mean by better, and what problem are we discussing?
Well, I think things like relationships and the state of hookup culture, people being ever divided, I see that as down to men and women, but on our behalf, men pursuing hedonism and instant gratification rather than actually
there's plenty of work
getting a hold of themselves.
There's loads of work for men to do, and men are the primary benefactors of that work. Like, one of the things that I've enjoyed about the TinMen is that because I'm placed under such a level of scrutiny, there are people that go through my posts with a fine tooth comb and a magnifying glass to make sure every single I is dotted and every single T is crossed and all the data lines up with my sources. People have contacted me saying, I'm going to go through your content right now, and if I find anything wrong, you'll hear about it. And they never respond. I'm like, what happened to that, by the way? And they're like, yes, it's great. I appreciate that. The level of scrutiny I am under has only served to make my content really watertight. Like, I am afforded no charitable. There's no charity for me. Like, people always assume the worst and they want you to fail. Like, I'm on a tightrope and people are literally cheering for me to fall. So I need to be really careful. And I like that. I like the fact that I'm put under this pressure and people expect me to be 100% every single time, get every single thing right every single day, which I don't. But it benefits me. And in the same way, I think a lot of the pressure men are placed under, a lot of it is not fair. These expectations, like blame for things we've never done and hate. But I think a lot of it can be a benefit to men because it makes us better people. Like, there is work to be done by men. I wouldn't say men as a group, but particular men within our group, and certain work to be done by people within their groups. And yeah, like, it horrifies me how much my girlfriend gets catcalled. Like, even when she's wearing like a really big, thick jacket with a hood up, literally looks like the Michelin Man, and she is really hot. And she gets catcalled multiple times a day sometimes, wearing a coat. And I'm like, God help her when she walks around in like a spaghetti top. And that's not something I've experienced. Like, I've not really been catcalled ever, not in a serious way. So yeah, there's work to be done. And like, the annoying thing about catcalling is that it never really happens to women when they're with men, because they'll kick their head in. Like, if anyone said that to me when I was there, I'd be like, I wouldn't be violent, but I would definitely have to make fun of them severely, repeatedly, until they go away. And yeah, absolutely, there's work to be done by men, but there's work to be done by women and everyone else. But yeah, I enjoy that part of the men's advocacy. When I posted about things like body dysmorphia, it seems to get a lot of different response to women's area of like body positivity, which is a bit more like fat acceptance, for example. And when I post about that in men, people are like, no, this is not what it's about. You should be encouraging men to be better and take care of their health and go to the gym and look after themselves and eat properly. And I'm like, I actually have a lot of time for that. Perhaps not as much as some people, but I think we can use this space for men to do better too, for ourselves and for others. So yeah, you're right.
Well, talk to me more about body dysmorphia. What's the state of body dysmorphia in men in 2024?
I mean, a lot of these conditions are based around how they present in women. So the way in which women are insecure about their bodies are not the same as men. So it's easy to miss the ways in which men are have body dysmorphia, even more so when they're even less likely to tell people about it. So very less likely to disclose these feelings. But there are plenty of men. Now, the latest research is saying men are no less likely to suffer from body dysmorphia as women. The International OCD Foundation puts it down at about 2 to 1, so 2 women for every 1 man. But it's a massive problem. Like, I know loads of men that are really, really insecure. Like, it ruins their life in many ways. They're insecure about different things. And it's not, like I said, it's not about necessarily about weight or like the size of their bum, like women. It's about like their hairline, their facial hair and their height, penis size. And really sad, like, there's so many contraptions that are just exploiting these insecurities for like huge amounts of money that are just dangerous and not safe and not right. And like, yeah, if you just look at, I remember seeing like a meme. It was like, this is what women are expected to be, and someone put down the Barbie doll, and then someone was like, well, this is men, and it was like fucking He-Man, and he had like a 12-pack, and he's like 12 feet tall, and absolutely, and I was like, how is that any more achievable than that? That's not to say we shouldn't be trying to be like He-Man in many ways, but it's got to be realistic. And unfortunately, we don't. If you look at the celebrities like Wolverine, for example, or Superman, or what's his name, Henry Cavill. Like the only way they can get that physique is by literally dehydrating their body for 3 days. So when Henry Cavill takes his top off, or Hugh Jackman takes his top off and he looks great, he's not drank water for 3 days. So there's no water in his body and the skin sits on his muscles perfectly. So there's none of his flab. And I was like, that is just not achievable. Like we need to drink water, and presenting these hyper-masculine men as a result of them dehydrating themselves is dangerous, because that's just simply not possible to do that. Not to mention they've gone for like a 12-month physical fitness regime with like some of the best sort of personal trainers in the world. So I absolutely am on board with like men bettering themselves, but I want to temper that with a sense of realism.
I've seen a weird swing, because I've been very much into gym since I was about 13. So I've grown up through my adolescence pursuing having a better physique and surrounded by all these influencers on Instagram. And I've been toying around with this idea in my head, and I haven't really articulated it out loud, but I've seen this trend where before it was all, look at this guy with an amazing physique. He's claiming that he's natural and has never been on steroids. Maybe I can achieve his physique one day. And that's super damaging, because you're setting unrealistic body standards, and all men think that if they just put in enough work, they will look like insert fitness influencer on a shit ton of steroids. But in the last few years, I've seen this swing back to authenticity, where people do share that they're on steroids. Someone like Sam Sulek talking about it, or Noel Diesel. And actually, from what I've seen anecdotally, to what value that's worth, I don't know, is more people considering taking steroids, because that illusion is gone, that if you work hard enough, you can have that dream body. And actually,
it's gone the opposite way.
The reality's hit that to have this body, you need to take steroids. And you'd think that those boys would go, okay, I'm just going to lower my expectations. But they don't. They just rise to them with the steroids now.
Whose expectations are they trying to meet? Like, some people think that they're women's expectations, but some people think they're men's expectations. I actually think when I go to the gym and I see some guy doing muscle ups and incredible, like, it's the people that are looking at that, like clapping, are the men. Like it's the men that are impressed by the muscle ups. I don't think women are that impressed. So I always want to know, whose expectations are you trying to meet? It's the same for, like, I find women that wear loads of makeup, and they just look like a doll. And like fake hair, fake eyelashes, fake everything. And I'm like, who is that for? I don't think most men find that attractive. I think that's for other women. Like, you're trying to sort of peacocking, I suppose you'd call it.
It's
good.
Sort of the status game.
Yeah, it's a status game. And I'm like, I think most men just prefer like just a natural look, and not this hyper feminine or hyper masculine. And I feel like we're doing that to appease ourselves and our peers. So yeah, I wish I could do a muscle up. I still have not done it. But yeah, I always question, who am I doing it for? But yeah, I mean, it's sad that people being more honest on steroids has actually led to an increase in people taking steroids.
And I don't have hard data on that, but
no, but I mean,
from what I've seen,
it's interesting. You would have thought it would go the opposite, or hoped it would have gone the opposite. But I'm glad that people are being more transparent, saying you cannot achieve this without steroids. Yeah.
Freya India talks again about how people now have Instagram face, and that actually, because of social media, people aren't going to these plastic surgery clinics with a picture of a celebrity, but they're going with a picture of themselves with a filter on their face. And I think that's very symbolic of what social media has done to Gen Z as a generation. We're now bettering ourselves, not even to have higher status than men in real life, but to have higher status than other people on social media. Everything's geared towards that crazy world where 10% of people make 92% of the noise, where the extremities are pushed. And I don't know if I see a way out of this with the current shape of social media.
I'm so glad I'm not involved. I don't do the filters thing. Like, it's amazing how much it changes someone's face. I'm like, what happens if one of these women go missing and all the photos are just completely, all these contorted, who the hell is, which one is, and she looks nothing like that. Like, obviously I'm joking, but yeah, that, again, like, you're putting a filter on someone's face that's changing the way they look and presenting it as that's who they are, and dangerous. I don't support it, and it's scary. But thankfully they're now putting the fact that you can see it's a filter rather than this is them, their actual face. But
yeah, but I'm still going to be attending my mates' funerals in however many years, and the picture on top of the coffin is going to be them with like cheekbones and a filter on their face. I think the direction that we're heading is terrifying.
Yeah, it's at what point, like unlocking your phone? Is it gonna, when you have so much makeup on? Is it that is the facial recognition? It's just like this is not the owner. Like, I don't know. It's a scary world that I'm just not part of. And like I said, I don't do filters. This is my face. I don't put my face so much on my page at all. I find it so weird how many influencers are like trying to do good work of in like gender equality, and then there's just a photo of their face. And like, what does that mean? I don't care. And thankfully, you won't see much about my page because I don't like being on there too much, and I don't like my face. So maybe I should do some filters. Who knows?
What generation are you part of?
Millennials.
Okay,
the best. Well, you're obviously Gen Z. I didn't realize you were 19.
Yeah.
You're impressive for a 19-year-old. You don't look like, I would have thought you'd be like mid-20s.
Thank you.
So, well, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's all right.
And this conversation sort of highlighted that difference in what I'm seeing in Gen Z and what a millennial's seeing. And obviously there are things that sort of go across different generations. What do you see as the big differences in men's struggles in the millennial generation compared to Gen Z and Gen Alpha?
I think Gen Z are more aware of it. I think Gen Z I know I make fun of them, but I feel like generally, and they're doing polls of people's approaches to feminism, for example, and there's an increasing movement of people saying that feminism has failed men. Like, we've gone so far in women's rights that we are now excluding men and discriminating against men. And that the number of people that are saying that, which includes me, is growing. And it's not growing in like the boomers, the Gen Z, or the millennials. It's growing in Gen Z. Gen Z are the ones that are leading that change, which is complete opposite. You would have thought it would be the boomers that are saying feminism's gone too far, but it's actually Gen Z. So I hope that Gen Z keep pushing for a more inclusive conversation on gender equality. And I personally see them as part of the solution, and they have to be part of the solution because they're coming of age now. And there's loads of young women, young men that follow me that I think are wonderful and are far more mature and informed than I was at that age.
What's the biggest shift, if you could pick out one thing to change Gen Z's attitude towards men? What's the shift that you would like to see?
I like to see men. I like everyone, including Gen Z, to see men as just individuals, not responsible for the actions of those who came before them, not responsible for the actions of men across the world that they've never met and can't do anything about. And also, men, they are individuals and victims in their own right. They are also shaped by their experiences, as I mentioned, and they are human beings. They're just human beings, as are women, in the same way that women are human beings. They are not all good or all bad. They're capable of both good and bad. And we are just human beings, and we're all just shaped by our experiences, and we're not part of some oppressive patriarchy that's trying to, tighten the manacles onto women's ankles. We're just men that's trying our best, and we deserve compassion just like anyone else. And these slogans that are just used to beat us over the head constantly, they're not helping anyone, and they don't help you look like a particularly great person either. So I would encourage people to see men as individuals, and each of them worthy of compassion, and not to see them as like an end point, but to see them as a product of their journey, not as a static, violent man, but as a bullied boy. Like, what's behind the violent man? Is it the bullied boy? Is it something else? Like, what has he been through to shape these experiences? And how do we understand that so we can stop more men following them down that road? And fortunately, we just see men as sort of inhuman patriarchs or oppressors or violent men or whatever else, and we never really see them as individuals, as Elliot or George or anything like that. And it's such a basic request just to ask people to see men as human beings. That's the thing that makes me really upsets me sometimes when I see people doing a bit of men's advocacy and they're like, men are human too, and I'm like, that's great, thank you for that, but that is fucking square one. Like, just reminding people that men are human. I'm like, fucking hell, we've got a lot of work to do. And like, men can experience pain, men get sad, men can, yeah. And now let's do the rest of it. That is square one. So I'm looking forward to the following squares and hopefully getting to the end of the game. But yeah, no, see, men are human beings, men are individual, and we're not responsible for the actions of others.
George, Appreciate you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you if they want to see more of your stuff?
Across various different platforms, but Instagram is the starting point. So TheTinMen on Instagram, but doing podcasts now. So maybe YouTube soon, LinkedIn, Facebook, Reddit, but Instagram is the one, TheTinMen.
Beautiful stuff. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.